This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, Special Prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a very important and a great show today. It's, as I've always said, it's very educational for the American people. You're hearing the inside track on what's really going on in Washington, D.C., around the country and around the world. I've had 40 years of experience in the bowels of Washington, no pun intended, because that's what it is. And unfortunately, it gets worse and worse every week. And of course, one of the big stories this week are the comments that President Donald Trump made about Attorney General Jeff Sessions. As I've said before, I met Sessions when he was a young lawyer, a U.S. attorney for the District of Alabama in Mobile. I had a case on behalf of a company, and I had something that I had to deal with him. I found him to be a gentleman. I found him to be a nice man. I don't know that anything happened at the time, but I met him over the years at a variety of events when I was running Judicial Watch and later running for the U.S. Senate. And I was always impressed with him. And I was very glad when the president nominated him as Attorney General and when he was confirmed. However, I've got to tell you, since then, and I wrote an article just yesterday in Newsmax. You can find it at the blog at Klayman's Court at Newsmax.com, or you can also find it on our website at freedomwatchusa.org. And it's entitled, Mr. Sessions, Either Do Your Job or Resign. And the reason I say that is that although the president was very, I would say, a little crass, to put it nicely, in the way he criticized the Attorney General in public, I wouldn't have done it that way, but everybody has their own style. He was right fundamentally in terms of the criticism. Not that he shouldn't have recused himself from the Russia investigation. That wasn't, frankly, all that big a deal if he had assigned the investigation to someone who was loyal to the president and loyal to conservative principles and loyal to the rule of law. But he didn't. It went to the number 2 at the Justice Department, Rod Rosenstein. And who is Rod Rosenstein? Rod Rosenstein, first of all, was put as in his number 2 by Jeff Sessions, a huge mistake. But before that happened, he was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland, you guessed it, during the Obama administration. Now, why would you put somebody in there who had been nominated by Obama and confirmed, who was not loyal totally to this administration? And then Rosenstein, when he was accused of writing a memorandum justifying the firing of James Comey, he panicked, because he's an establishment figure, and he doesn't want to be blamed by either side. He's played both sides of the street his entire professional life. That's why he was able to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland under Obama, and now number 2 at the Trump Justice Department. These are the bottom feeders of Washington, D.C. These are the people that sliver around like snakes, kissing up to everybody they can, and not just the derrieres. They kiss anything they can get a hold of to kiss, frankly. That's how they get their jobs. That's how Mueller got his job as FBI director. That's how Comey. They try to be all things to all people. So anyway, Rosenstein panics, and he, of course, appoints special counsel Robert Mueller to lead the investigation. Mueller's someone who, as I have said, and we'll talk about it later in the show because we're going to have Dennis Montgomery, that patriotic and courageous whistleblower from the NSA and CIA, on the show to comment on new developments. But Mueller was conflicted. Mueller has done illegal surveillance while he was FBI director. Mueller has staffed the investigation with Clinton cronies, people who gave mucho dinero to the Clinton Foundation, to the Clinton campaigns, Democrats, rabid Democrats, people that are out to destroy the president. And for that matter, Mueller have got tongue-tied. Matter and Mueller, maybe it's the same thing. He's out to destroy the president, too. He's spending tens of millions of dollars. He's got 15 lawyers already. What do you need 15 lawyers for to do an investigation? You've got the FBI. If you find something that's worthy of indictment, then you hire more lawyers. But this shows that he intends to really do a number on Trump. And frankly, either he's legally taken down or President Donald Trump's presidency is going to be severely compromised. We have, by the way, filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the special counsel. He's liable for that. And ultimately, we'll probably have to sue him to get the documents. I want to find out how these people were chosen and what their so-called qualifications were. All we know right now is their qualification is they hate Trump. So the president had a valid point when he said that Sessions should not have recused himself in essence. He could have recused himself, but he could have assigned the investigation to someone, a career person or a political appointee inside of the Department of Justice who would do a fair investigation of the so-called Russian collusion or connection, whatever you want to call it. Now, that's fair. Now, my other criticism with Jeff Sessions is that he's failed to look into illegal mass surveillance, as has been pointed out, and as we have come forward in lawsuits. You can find them at freedomwatchusa.org. Go there. Please contribute. We need your strong financial help. We are the mouse that roared. We are your real Justice Department. My alma mater really doesn't represent you. It represents the powerful interests in Washington, D.C. and around the country, those establishment interests. But he's failing to look into this mass surveillance, which continues on and on. We know with various publications that have come out recently in Circa News, Sarah Carter, John Solomon, that the government continues, the intel agencies, the FBI under Comey, prior to that under Mueller, to surveil people, spy on them without probable cause that they're committing a crime, or without probable cause that they're communicating with terrorists. This is dangerous. And in a court case back in 2014, we got a court to rule, Judge Leon, that this was almost Orwellian. It was like George Orwell's 1984. It was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This is serious stuff. And Sessions, although he's been informed of this, is just sitting on this and doing nothing. And, of course, this plays into Trump's other criticism, which is why wasn't he investigating the leaks of Samantha Power, the UN ambassador, of Susan Rice, the national security advisor under Obama, obviously all orchestrated by Obama himself to try to destroy Trump's candidacy for president, and thereafter in that transition period when they were making their plans, this Obama deep state, this Clinton deep state, to take President Trump and all of his men and women down. But last but not least, and this is where I lost a lot of respect for Jeff Sessions. He can certainly rejuvenate that respect if he now does his job. And that's why I say, do your job now or resign, because don't represent yourself. You have to push the American people first. Now, I had been discussing things with Jeff Sessions now for 5 months. I had a telephone conversation with him about 5 months ago, and I said, would you please review neutrally, not telling you how to come out, the political prosecution of Klayman Bundy. And we know Bundy's that rancher in Nevada who stood down the government with peaceful protesters. Yes, they were armed, but they were armed because they came to the ranch to protest a land grab that was instituted by corrupt Senator Harry Reid at the time and his son Rory Reid that were trying to sell the land out from under the Bundys, and a host of other issues that would have denied the Bundys the right to ranch on the land, which they have for 150 years, as well as other ranchers in the area. I said, just neutrally review this. And he said to me very nicely, Larry, I'll do that, but I have to get the other side, that is, the prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada, which are under his control, by the way, to also play a role. I said, fine, lay it all out on the table, see where it goes. This is not a fair prosecution. It was the Bundys that were injured. They didn't harm a hair on anybody. But Klayman's sister was beaten up. His dog was violently kicked and harmed. Cattle were killed. His 2 sons were tased brutally. So he said he would do that. And then I said, let's set up a meeting. He said, let's wait till Rosenstein comes in, the number 2, and then we'll set up a meeting. I said, fine. And I never heard anything. So I tried to set up a meeting and heard nothing. And basically was just waiting. And in the meantime, they said, send us some stuff by email, which I did, outlining what's going on in this case that's being overruled or overseen, rather, by a very politicized, a very biased, and a very prejudiced judge by the name of Gloria Navarro. She's the hand-picked judicial henchman, in effect, of Harry Reid that Obama put in that court. She's the chief judge. And she's denied me the ability to get into that court to represent Klayman. I'm now up at the Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court to order her to let me in because he doesn't have a defense team. And he's facing trial in just about a month to a month and a half. This is a year and a half after Klayman's been put in prison without bail. First, Navarro threw him in prison in solitary. She absolutely hates Klayman and anybody around him, and she's doing the bidding of Harry Reid and Obama, who got offended when Klayman used the word Negro. I mean, this is theater of the absurd. And he was talking complimentary about African Americans, equating his plight to them as well. So here's the bottom line. Nothing happens with Jeff Sessions. We're waiting to have a meeting. We're waiting for him to review the case. Other prosecutions before Klayman's are going forward. Some people are getting convicted. We're going to talk about that later in the next segment. But eventually I show at the Justice Department, and I want to meet with the scheduler to get a meeting. And then I get a letter, oh, we're sending all your stuff over to the U.S. Attorney in Nevada. Well, that U.S. Attorney acting, Steve Myray, has committed so much prosecutorial misconduct to make the exorcist's head spin. And he's sending it to them to do an evaluation of the case. He's sending it into the devil's lair. And then he shows up in Las Vegas just about a week or so later and says, our prosecutors are courageous. They're doing their job. They should be complimented. But I'm not taking sides. I mean, you got to be kidding me. The Attorney General of the United States, where the buck stops on his desk, is not taking sides. I mean, what is this? Political pandering and tomfoolery, or is he the Attorney General or not? So I wrote this column and I said, look, Trump's criticisms are valid. My criticisms are valid. Jeff, I like you. You're a Southern gentleman. I think you're a nice man. But either do your job. If you can't take the heat in the kitchen, get the heck out. And that's where I stand today. So let's see what happens with Jeff Sessions. We'll be right back.
Fearless.
This Klayman, he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
You don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I want to talk now about the judge in the Bundy case, Gloria Navarro. She sentenced one of the defendants. He's not being tried with Klayman, but his name is Greg Burleson. He was set up by an FBI sting. They pretended that they were doing a documentary. They went to see him after the successful standoff in Bunkerville. They tricked him into bragging about what he did. Of course, he was proud about what he did because they stood down the government, and he said some things which he shouldn't have said, and they were over the top. But he didn't mean any harm by it. I mean, people do puff and they huff. But he was sentenced yesterday, and guess what he got from Judge Navarro? 86 years. Now, he's an elderly gentleman. He's about 66. He's in bad health. He's nearly blind. This is a life sentence. And here's what the judge said, and it tells you her mindset. Despite the fact that the Bundy family had the crap beaten out of them, their dog kicked, and their cattle killed, the judge says, this isn't something which heals over with a scab. You can't put a cast on it or stitch it up. Now, this tells you the mindset of Gloria Navarro, the judge. In other words, federal agents that were there, they were armed. The Bureau of Land Management that was being run by the hand-picked henchman, you guessed it, of Harry Reid again. So now he had the henchman of the Bureau of Land Management. Now he's got the judge in his hip pocket, along with Obama and the deep state in the Obama years that's still in control of this government. He was sentenced to 86 years, and a statement was made that this was a scab that won't heal over. Yet we have these armed federal goons there who were pointing guns, threatening the lives of the Bundy family and others. And this becomes that they got PTSD, or they're going to be traumatized, or maybe they'll become impotent or something because of this whole thing that went on. I'm not even being facetious here. Frankly, this is an outrage. It tells you what this tyrannical government is all about. It tells you that the powers to be rule the school. It tells you to be that they want to put you away. They can find a reason to put you away. And that's why we fight so hard at Freedom Watch, and go to freedomwatchusa.org. Please contribute. We will not stand for this government tyranny. We do everything legally, peacefully, but someone has to stand up for the American people. And Jeff Sessions is not standing up for the American people when he says, I'm not taking sides. I mean, give me a break. This is our Attorney General. Well, if that's our Attorney General, it's time to retire. Let's talk about another individual who some people think highly of. Frankly, I used to. I don't anymore. I think he has become an evil force in Washington. I feel bad that he has a brain tumor, but maybe that brain tumor has been affecting him for a lot longer than just the president, and that's John McCain. Yesterday, he killed the skinny version of the repeal of Obamacare, and that was meant only to send the matter to committee between the House of Representatives and the Senate so they could work out a deal. And McCain, in his usual way to kiss up to the leftist media, to be big man on campus, to be the big shot that he thinks he is, and frankly, he's done little to nothing over the last decades other than shoot off his mouth. He cast the third vote, which killed the skinny version, which basically was going to eliminate, the taxes on Obamacare, the forced signing up for Obamacare, that kind of thing, and forced the Republicans to get their act together. Now, he says, we should bring in the Democrats. You know what, John McCain, on your way out, maybe in heaven, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, you can become a Democrat, because that's where you are right now. I got to tell you about McCain earlier, too, is that years ago, I tried to get him to intervene at the Voice of America, which was spewing forth pro-Iranian propaganda under Obama. The Persian News Network was being run by the son of a mullah, if you can believe that. McCain had just lost the 2008 election, and he had a lot of power at the time, and he could have done something about it. He did nothing about it, yet he shoots his mouth off about Iran. There's no war he doesn't like. He's just a blowhard. And, although I feel sorry for him, and I really do, I'm glad that he's not going to be in the Senate in the future. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. I'm a Christian. But this guy is really bad news. And you ought to let him know about it, brain tumor or not. He's got to represent the American people, not his own ego, not his own inflated ego, which is out of control. So, that's where we are this week. I'm a little bit agitated. I see the country, frankly, with the exception of the hope that we have of this president going down the drain. I see the judiciary is compromised politically. We're going to talk about that. I see the Congress has ground to a halt thanks to people like McCain. And I see the presidential branch of government basically being ground to a halt with what I think are runaway special counsel investigations and people who aren't loyal to this president right inside the White House. And I'm glad that they do have Scaramucci. And let's hope that Priebus is gone in the next few weeks, the chief of staff. We'll be right back.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this president.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I have on the line right now, but I'm going to give a little introduction before we get into it, Dennis Montgomery. He is a very patriotic and courageous whistleblower, former NSA, former CIA contractor, began his career in this regard working for Warren Trepp in Las Vegas doing facial recognition software, be able to tell whether they're criminals at the gaming table. The FBI, the CIA, the NSA got wind of this technology, and they flew out to Las Vegas and Nevada and ultimately signed contracts with Intrepid because this was converted into a way to disencrypt the subliminal messages of Osama bin Laden that he was having broadcast over Al Jazeera. And by the way, as an aside, I understand that Israel is now discussing throwing Al Jazeera out of Israel. They've been whipping up hatred at the Temple Mount between Arabs and Jews and others. No surprise, but that's a side story. Dennis came forward with the help of federal judge Royce Lamberth, who I know quite well over the years. I don't have any cases with him. I didn't have cases at the time. And he's probably the only person currently in Washington that I trust. He's a great man, and he's independent. I mean, he's a Reagan appointee, but he's going against Republicans as well. He almost threw Gail Norton, Secretary of the Interior, in jail years ago for contempt over misappropriation of monies for the Indian Trust Fund. Well, anyway, I went to Lamberth and I said, how do we bring Montgomery forward? Because he left with 47 hard drives, over 600 million pages of information showing mass surveillance on the American people, mass surveillance on the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, mass surveillance on other justices, mass surveillance on 156 plus other judges, prominent businessmen like Donald Trump and his family and people around him, and even yours truly. They got my stuff from my banking records back in Miami, Florida, among other things. So I brought him forward, and Judge Lamberth, and I'll make the long story short, suggested that we go to the FBI. Judge Lamberth knew the general counsel of the FBI, James Baker. He told me about Comey, how he had stood up to George W. Bush when he wanted to do warrantless wiretaps, and he thought it would be a good idea. And I don't fault Judge Lamberth for this because, you know what, people can change. Comey obviously over the years was corrupted. Maybe he was a decent man way back when, but he went the way of the swamp in Washington, and he became one of those alligators crawling around on their belly, sucking up to anyone who could get him a higher appointment, and ultimately became FBI director as a result, just like Mueller did before him. So anyway, to make the long story short, again, Lamberth and I and my assistant went over to the FBI, and we met with James Baker. And we said, look, we'd like to talk to James Comey. We want to tell him that this perhaps is the biggest scandal in American history. It needs to be addressed. I need to get immunity from my client, Dennis Montgomery, to come forward with these hard drives, to be able to turn them over and to be able to testify under oath. He's not a Snowden. He did the right thing. He's been trying to be a whistleblower for years. No one would listen to him because, frankly, probably people on Capitol Hill already knew about this, or they were afraid that the intelligence agencies would then surveil them and smear them and destroy their personal and political careers. I said, but we need to deal with Comey, and I need to meet with him. And Baker came back, and we met with him 2 or 3 times in his offices at the FBI. Remember the meetings extremely well. He had other FBI agents there during the second meeting, 3 of them, special agents. He says, we're going to give this top priority. It's going to be run by James Comey himself, but you're going to be dealing with me. I said, I'd like to meet with the FBI director. I have a good impression of him. He says, well, he's busy right now, but I'm going to handle it. I'm the one in charge, and I'm coordinating closely with Comey, and he's, in fact, ultimately in charge. So we brought Montgomery forward. He produced the hard drives in Miami, Florida. There's an inventory of that. It's been published by Circa News. Nothing confidential about it in terms of classified information. I've never seen any of the classified information that Dennis turned over. I don't want to. But the investigation languished for 2.5 years, despite the fact that Montgomery had also been interviewed under oath by 2 special agents, Walter Giardina and William Barnett, for over 3 hours in a soundproof room at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., at their field headquarters, rather. And we expected something to happen. So I started making inquiries with Baker. I said, what's happening? And I don't get any response. Then I asked him for the 302 reports, because when you're interviewed by the FBI prepares what are called 302 investigative reports. No response. I had to file a lawsuit over that recently. And, of course, Dennis was subject to smear campaigns by so-called national security reporters. They're not really reporters at all. They're basically just shills of the New York Times and the leftist media. One of them is James Risian, and one of them is Eric Lichtblau. Lichtblau recently, of course, got fired from CNN for making up fake news stories about Trump's Russia connection. These are the people that went out and tried to smear Dennis because the intelligence agencies knew that Dennis was coming forward and he was going to finger them for all of their criminal illegality. And one of them wrote a book, Risian, with Lichtblau's help, that called Dennis the Emperor of the War on Terror. Well, you know, maybe he was the Emperor of the War on Terror, but he was a good emperor. He wasn't a bad one. And they accused him of committing the biggest hoax in American history with the software that he developed and other things that he did. They said that his software and disencryption technology could have led George W. Bush to shoot down civilian airliners in the holiday period of 2003. very serious. And we sued James Risen over defamation. That's libel and slander. He also gave interviews on TV with Jon Stewart. He just trashed Montgomery and did it basically because he's dependent on sources from these agencies, the intel agencies. So he was doing their bidding to get more information he could use for his publications, in all likelihood. They never even fact-checked the book. We did discovery. No fact-checking, no nothing. It was a sensationalized book that claimed that he was relying on confidential information, and Dennis became the fulcrum, the crux of the book, Emperor of the War on Terror. So basically, we sued his derriere. And what happened was is that the people that were defending the case on behalf of Risen, not coincidentally, the wife of Harold Ickes, who was one of the most evil people in the Clinton administration, Deputy White House Chief of Staff, she made a motion that said, well, unless we see Dennis's software and can analyze it, and they didn't even have anybody that could analyze it because they had nobody with a security clearance, it was just a ruse, then the case is going to have to be dismissed because truth is a defense. If it doesn't work, then, of course, Risen was not lying that Montgomery had committed one of the biggest hoaxes in American history. Now, you didn't need the software to make that determination. And, in fact, the CIA and the NSA and the other intel agencies both said it's classified, it can't be produced. There were ways to try the case without that. But when we turned the hard drives over, I had told Baker and others around him that we may need to get it back for the court, and if the court wanted it, because we weren't trying to hide anything. And, of course, they stonewalled at that point, didn't want it to come back. And they said, well, we're not doing this, even though we had an oral agreement to do that. Now, why is that? And here's the bottom line, and then we're going to talk to Dennis. The bottom line is that Dennis and I were defrauded by James Baker and the FBI. We were led to believe they were going to conduct a serious investigation into this mass surveillance of hundreds of millions of Americans and Donald Trump. Therefore, Dennis put his neck on the line, turned the stuff over, because even when you have immunity, it's no guarantee. It's called use and derivative use immunity. They can go around that. But Dennis is a patriot. He did it for the country. But what they were doing was taking this stuff off the market to bury it. That's what Baker was doing along with Comey. And then sabotaging Dennis's civil case against Risen for defaming him. Now, why is that important? Because just yesterday it was revealed by Sarah Carter and John Solomon of Circa News, who have done stories about Dennis. Go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org. You'll read all about the case, and Dennis has filed a new case along with me against Comey, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and all of them, is that Baker now, it turns out, is under criminal investigation himself for leaking classified information. And we also find out, and go to freedomwatchusa.org, these articles will be posted, that Baker was the one at the FBI, as in effect the number two, Comey's lawyer, who was making decisions on who could be surveilled with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court by certifying that this was necessary for national security and there was probable cause under the Fourth Amendment. So it's kind of the old adage, what goes around comes around. There is divine justice frequently. I mean, I believe in God. There will be justice one way or the other. But Baker, Comey, Mueller before that, they're all dirty. They all have allegedly committed crimes. I believe that they have committed crimes. We have our court suit in Washington. I'm going to add Baker to that. We're asking for discovery of the people that are responsible, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Baker. We're going to ask for Baker and others. So this is super important. This is the worst thing in American history. The American people are being monitored. They're being spied upon minute by minute. This is an effort to bring down the Trump presidency. And I want Dennis to talk a little bit right now. I know I've hogged this segment, but I wanted you to understand what's at stake. And there's not that much that Dennis can say because he's doing all this the right way, the legal way, and he's waiting for someone on Capitol Hill or anywhere in government who is responsible to interview him with regard to the cover-up of this mass surveillance by James Comey, James Baker, and others in and around them. Dennis, what are your thoughts about all of this? I mean, you've been a heroic whistleblower. How do you feel?
Well, I'm very disappointed to hear that both now Comey and Baker have been leaking classified information to the media. I came to the FBI as an American trying to do the right thing the right way and turning the information over to show that the government has been doing domestic surveillance, not on a few thousand people, on millions and millions of people. And I turned over the database showing who was unmasked by these programs and what type of information was taken. And now I find out after 2 years that James Baker is out leaking classified material. I am so disappointed. You know, my health is not that great, as you well know. And to have it drug on for years, then find out the only reason they wanted the information was to bury it, is so upsetting to me.
Well, I'll tell you what's upsetting, too. You know, I mean, you do have people in government who don't behave correctly, who commit civil and criminal acts. You know, that's why I founded Judicial Watch in 94. That's why I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2003. I wanted to take the concept inside of the Senate like a Trojan horse and actually file cases there. And that's why when I didn't win, I formed Freedom Watch. But what really gets under my skin is that nobody in the government wants to look at this. They all want to just play patty cakes. They don't want to delve into the crimes that were committed by the FBI, by the NSA, by the CIA. They're ongoing. We know they're ongoing. There was just a report yesterday by John Solomon of Circa News and The Hill magazine that hundreds were unmasked illegally under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act inside the Trump administration and before that during the campaign. And otherwise, I believe that we're some of those people that were subject to that, Dennis. We're going to ask the court to force disclosure of that. But the fact that these intelligence committees and the judiciary committees on Capitol Hill are looking the other way, that they're so afraid, and it's like Sessions in a way I talked about in the early part of the show. They're putting their own interests ahead of the American people. They're worried that if they push and investigate these intelligence agencies, that they're going to get smeared, that their lives will be ruined. Well, you know what? Our founding fathers pledged their sacred honor and their lives and their fortunes to found a new nation. I think we can expect at least a little bit of that from Congress. And we don't see that from Congress. Instead, we see people like John McCain and others who are destructive, that are just pounding their own chest for their own benefit and basically self-aggrandizing fools as the country literally burns. So, Dennis, I want to thank you for what you've done. You are courageous. The American people owe you a great debt of gratitude. Dennis, give your GoFundMe real quick.
I have a GoFundMe account. If you just type in CIA whistleblower, that will bring you to my account. I can use all the help that I can get. I've suffered.
Thank you, Dennis. We're going to have to cut it there. We're running short on time, but glad you were able to do that. Thank you for coming on.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm going to wrap this show up with what we call the verdict. You know, I used to have a publication at Judicial Watch called The Verdict, but this is the real verdict because we're hard-hitting. You know, one of the differences between me and my former colleagues over there is that I'm a trial lawyer of 40 years. I'm in the trenches. We have a lawsuit now with regard to Dennis Montgomery and myself. We sued James Comey. We sued the FBI. We sued the NSA. We sued the CIA. We sued everybody but the BBC. And that's the British Broadcasting Network, but we may get around to that. And we've moved to get discovery in that case. Depositions of Comey, of James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence who lied under oath that there wasn't this mass surveillance going on. John Brennan, the very corrupt former CIA director under Obama, who also illegally surveyed even people on Capitol Hill, Dianne Feinstein, when he was, and she was a Democrat, believe it or not, head of the Intelligence Committee at the time. But this lawsuit's moving forward. Go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org. see what we're doing, please contribute generously to our cause. Contribute to the KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, because we need to do all we can peacefully and legally in our court system and otherwise, and through education, like in this radio show, to teach the American people that they need to rise up, that they do have rights, whether they're First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, or other constitutional rights. We forget that in this country. And the thing that really troubles me the most is a lawyer of 40 years. I started in 1977 at Blackwell and Walker in Miami. I moved to the Justice Department. I was a prosecutor and defense lawyer. I helped break up AT&T. I went out into private practice with a small law firm doing international trade. 1983, I started my own law firm, and I saw how corrupt the legal system and the government was, and I started Judicial Watch in 1994, and basically it's morphed into Freedom Watch today at freedomwatchusa.org. But what really upsets me is that the American people really don't have a very reliable mechanism to make change legally. And that's because the judges who have become federal judges that have control of these cases are 70, 80, 90% sometimes Clinton and Obama appointees. And I got to tell you, even the ones that were appointed by Republican presidents, the way they come up the line, they're establishment characters. They don't want to stick their neck out too far. They're not like a Dennis Montgomery. They're not like a Larry Klayman. They're not like a Bob Barr, who we had on a couple shows here, my good friend who, along with me and others, started the impeachment of Bill Clinton. This is the kind of thing that really troubles me, because these judges rule not on the basis of the law, but on the basis of their own political and personal beliefs. That happens more often than not. I can guess almost 100% of the time how a judge is going to rule based upon who appointed him or her and what their background is. And that's why our Judicial Selection Strike Force Coalition, go to judicialselectionstrikeforce.org or go to freedomwatchusa.org, is that we need judges who stand there for the American people, who aren't establishment hacks, got in there because their law firms contributed huge amounts of money to the president or a senator in a particular state or a labor union or some other special interest. And with some exceptions, like Judge Royce Lambert, a great judge, Judge Richard Leon, another great judge, like Stanley Sporkin, who became my friend. He was a judge on the D.C. federal court for a number of years. Like Judge Sanders Sauls in Florida, who administered to the 2000 election case, Bush v. Gore, or Gore v. Bush, however you want to put it. It went both ways over that election, and a few others. We do not have the best and the brightest on the bench, and I'm sorry to say that, because I really believe in the legal system. I really want this legal system to represent the American people. But as in 1776, when the legal system of King George III broke down, and King George III took the criminal justice system back to the court of King James in London and took it away from the colonies, our legal system has been taken away from us. And that's dangerous, because when that happens, that's a formula for revolution. And that is why we're working so hard. And when we get a good judge like Judge Leon, who has the courage to put his foot down in our NSA case, in our Comey case, please contribute to that, because this is one of the few examples where we are able perhaps to get justice and to put an end to this tyrannical Orwellian state, which is like a sword of Damocles over all of our heads. I look forward to coming back and talking to you next week. It's a gradual process, but Patriots, hang in there. We all either have to hang together, or as Ben Franklin said, we'll all hang separately. God bless you. God bless America. God save America.